Hello everyone, and happy Halloween! I was hoping to help you celebrate this holiday with a little bit of education about some of the symbolism used and where it came from, how the ritualistic practice of going door to door evolved into what it is today, and where setting a fire inside some sort of vegetable actually served a purpose other than just looking cool or spooky on your porch. But then I realized the majority of you probably don't care in the slightest, so I thought I'd do a dramatic reading of some creepypasta instead. For those of you who don't know, creepypasta is basically scary stories shared over the internet in a variety of formats, all for the sake of trying to get under your skin. Some of them aren't as effective, some are rather interesting stories, and some are short but sweet. I found a few that I'd like to share with you today. So, let's get started, shall we? Self-preservation. If you're reading this, then I am hopefully long gone. It's been 2 months now since the meteor struck Mississippi. There was a lot of public interest in it, astrologers and the like all gathering around for a look. They took samples of the rock and shipped them all over the world to museums in every country. Hell, I almost made a trip to have a look myself, but I had an interview with a potential employer. If he hadn't called me up the previous day, I'd be dead now. 3 days later, after the initial hype died down, the news reported nothing on the meteor for a couple of days. The next thing I heard about it was when I got home from the pub and turned on the late-night news. I was just in time to catch a breaking news article. The worried-looking reporter informed me that almost everyone who had been in the vicinity of Mississippi when the meteor went down had been hospitalized. Their symptoms were similar to those that a corpse experiences during decomposition. 10 people had already died, mostly the elderly and the very young. Scientists and geneticists from all over the globe were working frantically to try and find a cure. Being smarter than the average bear, I gathered some supplies and prepared for an epidemic. Years of being paranoid beyond reason was finally about to pay off. The news the next day had a lighter tone. A Chinese scientist had worked out that the meteor had contained an alien strain of bacteria that slowly broke down flesh tissue. The scientist also remarked that the bacteria were only affecting humans. He had also worked out that if a victim consumed a living being, such as an insect, it would delay the progression of the bacteria, giving the scientists more time to figure out a more permanent cure. Anyone who thought they may have contracted the infection was to eat as many live creatures as they could. The reporter also explained that the U.S. Army was attempting to contain the infection. They failed. Anyone who has read Stephen King's book, The Stand, will have an idea of how the bacteria made its way around the world. It passed through the air, but to catch it, you had to be near someone infected. Because the symptoms took between 3 to 5 days to kick in, people didn't realize that they were infected. In a week, Victus Somes disease, as it had been named, was global. I had barricaded myself in my house, with towels and blankets stuffed into every crack. I had the TV tuned to the news all day and night. The scientists had not predicted that the bacteria would adapt to the infected people's efforts at trying to keep it at bay. Victims all over the world were claiming that the insects were no longer working. People were starting to catch small mammals and eat them. As the days went by, people were slowly eating larger and larger animals. The first reported case of cannibalism was, ironically, the last broadcast made. The anchorman's hair was falling out and he was missing 3 teeth. He nervously told America that there had been a reported case of cannibalism in southern Europe. He also said that there would be no further broadcasts. All survivors were to lock themselves in their house and not let anyone in. For the next week and a half, I watched the infected shamble up the street, knocking on doors. One of my neighbors, a couple of houses down from me, was stupid enough to open the door. 3 people dragged him out and started biting his flesh. They started with his arms and legs, trying to keep him alive for as long as possible. They were crying as they ate. Their meal was shrieking in pain, and the 3 people eating him were apologizing furiously through mouthfuls of his arm. I don't think they were able to control themselves. It looked more like they were disgusted by what they had to do to stay alive. They tried to break into my house 5 or 6 days later, but my barricades held. They were outside, begging me to let them in. "Just one bite. Please, be generous." I listened to their pleading all night, too scared to sleep. I suppose I should explain why I'm writing this. I'm infected. Yesterday I coughed and lost a canine. I spent the night pulling out my teeth, easing them out one by one. It didn't hurt. They just slid out, like pulling up carrots. The bugs have stopped working, and all the wild animals have long since run away. I have decided to lure someone into my house and attack them. It sounds so wrong, writing that out, but I don't want to die. And I'm so hungry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. A mother's love. One afternoon, a couple was traveling on by car when, at a far distance, they saw a woman in the middle of the road, waving frantically. The wife told her husband to keep on driving, because it might be too dangerous, but the woman decided to pass by slowly so he wouldn't stay with a doubt on his mind of what might have happened, and the chances of anyone being hurt. As they got closer, they noticed the woman had cuts and bruises on her face as well as on her arms. They then decided to stop and see if they could be of any help. The cut and bruised woman was begging for help, telling them that she had been in a car accident and that her husband and son, a newborn baby, were still inside the car, which was in a deep ditch. She told them that her husband was already dead, but that her baby seemed to be still alive. The husband, traveling, decided to get down to the wreck and try to rescue the baby, and asked the hurt woman to stay with his wife inside of their car. When he got there, he noticed 2 people in the front seats of the car, but he didn't pay any importance to it. He took out the baby quickly and climbed back up to take the baby to its mother. When he arrived, he didn't see the mother anywhere, so he asked his wife where she had gone. She told him that the woman followed him back to the crashed car. When the husband went back to look for her, he noticed that the couple in the front seats were dead, one of whom was unmistakably the woman who had flagged them down. In between. I'm in between. One of them bit me. The bastard took a chunk out of my upper arm. The fool probably didn't even know it was an arm. He probably saw me as a walking turkey leg or something. Oh, but he got his dues. I whacked his useless head off with a crowbar I stole when shit got serious. It got serious about a month ago, and let me tell you, it happened just the way everyone thought it would happen. Some contained little outbreak, and then boom, everyone I know is staggering around like kangaroos tripping on dextro. Not me, though. I knew I was going to fight it. I did well until about a week ago when Mr. Slobbermouth munched on my bicep. It amazes even me that I'm so coherent. God, I wish I wasn't. I'm not like them, but I'm just like them. I have the hunger they have, but I have all the guilt and love of humanity that is going to keep me from surviving. I'm not even sure I want to survive anymore. I see them do horrible things, things that are starting to drive me mad, and I either get sick to my stomach or find my mouth watering. I don't want to live if living means I have to watch the destruction of my kind every day. But then, this means no more hiding. It's as if they can sense something in me, like they scan for a zombie membership card and find it on me. They leave me alone. I can walk freely among them. You know how I said I'm just like them? Well, I'm better than them. I'm smarter, and I have the ability to gain the trust of humans. I found one yesterday. I know where all the good hiding spots are, you see, and Lord, it was happy to find me. It grasped my arm and looked into my eyes, saying it was happy to find someone to fight with. Making sure that none of the no-brains were around, I took it with me and hid with it in the storm cellar. I let it fall asleep. Then I broke its neck, busted open its head like a coconut, and tore into its meaty brain. The bud complimented it nicely. For a few moments, I felt bad for what I had done. I saw his body in that stagnant pool of blood, looking as if he was still sleeping, and felt some remorse for the poor, trusting boy. I wondered about his life before the disaster. Was he happy? Did his family love him? Would he have survived anyway? That acidic guilt rose in me, a constant reminder of my humanity. But there's at least one thing zombies and humans have in common: the will to survive. And I'm about to do a much better job than either one of them will. Chemical. If you asked me how long we've been down here, I wouldn't know. We don't see the sun, and nobody seems to have a watch. It doesn't matter anyway. We don't have anywhere to be. For all we know, there isn't anywhere left to be. The surface has surely been overrun with death and decay by now. There are 6 of us left. Until just recently, there were 7. Her screaming has stopped now, and I feel relief. It was hard to sleep with those agonizing screams and the banging on the steel door. Huddled in my blankets, I look around at the other survivors. 4 men and a woman, all of us unkempt and haggard. At one point, we all worked here, but since the accident, it's become our prison. The painfully low amount of food is in a pile in the center of the room, so we can all keep an eye on it to make sure nobody is taking more than we're allowed per day. There's enough food for 3, maybe 4 meals. None of us want to think about it. We just stare. There are no beds, just piles of blankets and paper that make crude sleeping areas. There's one bathroom at the far end of the complex, and it has running water. There are 3 other rooms we used to work in, filled with computers and lab equipment that has accumulated a fine layer of dust. We still have power somehow, so all the security cameras and lights still work. Unfortunately, none of the computers work because they've been shut and locked as per emergency protocol. Any contact with the outside world is non-existent. We worked for the military doing basic chemical research. Somewhere along the line, a chemical was leaked, and the results were fatal. People who came into direct contact with the chemical succumbed to vomiting, mild at first, then intense until they had nothing to excrete except for their own blood. Nobody lasted more than a couple of hours once they had touched the chemical. It also spread through saliva, bile, and blood, so those with the misfortune of coming into contact with even a single drop were doomed. We had to toss that woman out because we caught her vomiting in the toilet. She said she was pregnant and that it was only morning sickness, but you can't be sure. Her fiancé, Barry, tried to intervene, calling us animals. We clubbed him over the head, then tied and gagged him to a thick pipe at one end of the room. He strains against the bonds and screams into the gag occasionally, a fierce and wild-eyed look on his face. It's for his own good and the good of everyone here. He might hurt someone. He needs to be untied and fed eventually. but nobody wants to be the one to do it. So we just sit and stare at the pile of food on the floor that gets lower with each rationed meal. He's another mouth to feed that we can't afford. Everyone is on the edge, twitchy and jumpy. Every movement is watched intently with suspicious and unrelenting eyes. Nobody talks anymore. They just stare. We all know we're going to die. It's just a matter of time before hunger or the chemical gets us. It's all in the backs of our minds, eating away at our sanity. It's been a while now since the incident with the sick woman. Barry died while I was asleep, and our food supplies have run out. I draw the blanket over my head and drift into a fitful sleep, filled with hunger pangs. I'm awakened some time later by the sound of whispers. I can see 3 members of our group huddled in a circle and identify them as Marcus, Daniel, and Eileen. My stirring causes them to look over, piercing me with savage eyes. They start moving towards me with a hungry look on their faces. Their intent hits me with a sudden burst of fear, and I scramble to my feet. Marcus grabs me by the collar and tears as I break loose from his grip. Daniel grabs at my blanket and I shove him hard against the third attacker, Eileen. They go sprawling and I spring back past them and into the computer room, locking the door as fast as I can. Dragging desks and cabinets, I make a crude and hopefully secure barricade. I see them banging themselves against the door and the windows, glaring at me with feral eyes. Something catches their attention down the hall, and they stop, heads snapping sharply in the direction of the bathroom. The 5th man, Jackson, must have finished using the facilities, unaware of the intent of the other 3. He approaches and peers into the window, a puzzled look on his face. I try to scream a warning, but all that escapes my throat is a hoarse rattle. It's too late anyway, and his face is smashed against the glass by one of the others. I stare in horror as his face is smashed into a pulp, each thud resounding through the room like a slow heartbeat. Then, his body is taken away, and there is silence. They're gone for now, but they'll be back. Hunger gnaws at my stomach, and I search frantically for any morsel of food. With extreme luck, I manage to find a candy bar in one of the desk drawers and hungrily devour it, thanking whoever it was who had the sweet tooth. My bliss soon passes, and the hunger pains return. I try to sleep, but even the slightest sound jolts me awake. I have no idea how much time has passed, but suddenly they're bashing the blood-smeared window with a pipe. They're going to get in, and I will need to defend myself. There's an emergency axe in one corner of the room, inside a glass case. I smash the glass and retrieve it, and it makes me feel a little bit better. My anxiety grows along as spiderweb cracks on the window with each passing moment. After God knows how many attempts, the window finally shatters and the wild, barely human face of Marcus peers in. I sit in a chair with the axe out of view and wait. I'm going to die anyway, so I might as well go out fighting. He climbs in, followed by Eileen and finally Daniel. They approach slowly in a mini skirmish line. When they get close enough, Marcus raises the pipe for a killing blow. Before he has time to bring it down, I swing my axe and slice him in the chest. The pipe clatters to the floor, and as I spring to my feet, Eileen lunges at where I was and crashes into the now empty chair. I swing the axe, catching Daniel off guard and delivering a blow to the temple. His blood showers me and stings my eyes, blinding me. Eileen lunges for me again and tackles me around the ankles, sending me to the ground. I manage to hang on to my axe, and as her hands clasp around my neck, I slash her throat. The hands grip tighter for a moment, and then loosen, and her lifeless body crumples on top of me. Pushing her off, I stagger towards Marcus, gagging from the strangling I had just received. He was still alive, dragging himself through his own blood towards the fallen pipe. I stick my foot on his back, and swing the axe onto his skull. My heart racing, I stumble backwards and am grabbed by hands from behind. The axe is wrenched from my hand and I feel a sharp prick on my neck. I lose all muscle control and slump to the floor. Through blurred vision, I see men in hazmat suits all around me. I hear the sound of their voices, but they seem distorted and far away. Then, the man nearest me speaks, and the words register into my brain with horror. "The experiment has gone on long enough," he says, before I sink into total darkness. Evaporation. Water. Water is the cornerstone of life. It nourishes us, irrigates our crops, and waters our livestock. Water is vital for all known forms of life. We rely on it to wash our cars, clean our food, and produce our power. It has an effect on almost every activity in everyday life. Without it, civilization would cease to function. Governments would collapse, crippled by an undefeatable enemy. Drought. It would be a matter of days, no longer than a week, before every living being on Earth perished. In short, we cannot live without water. 2 days ago, we were forced to begin doing just that. I don't know how it all began. Nobody left alive does. During the initial hours of it, theories ranged from the barely plausible, like a new form of greenhouse gas, to the ridiculous, such as a new type of light, one that only evaporated water. I remember those hours fondly. The true enormity of what had happened had not yet sunk in, and hysteria had not yet clutched the human race. What happened? I'll put it simply. The first was that every single drop of fresh water on the entire planet evaporated instantly. I don't think I can do this event justice, but I'll try. Can you imagine every single river, every single lake, every single natural source of water drying up instantly without rational explanation? I doubt you can, but that's exactly what happened. It wasn't restricted to natural sources either. As far as I can tell, all the bottled water in the world also evaporated, as did that in water tanks and other similar sources. It also disappeared from other substances, including soft drinks, creating foul sugar compounds that would make those that consumed it quite ill. There was not a single drop of fresh water left anywhere on Earth for anybody to drink. But by far the worst result of the lack of water was the nuclear reactors. Without pressurized water, most of the nuclear reactors in the entire world, those that utilize purified water as coolant, had no available sources of coolant, and just under half of these had poor or untested fail-safe plans. The resulting effect of this led to catastrophic nuclear meltdown in roughly 46% of water-cooled reactors. The world, already reeling from the unprecedented situation, fell into total anarchy. International communication ceased after almost exactly 24 hours after it began. But there was a second effect: the saltwater poisoning. Many people flocked to desalination plants in the first few hours, hoping for salvation. They found none. At approximately the same time as the worldwide evaporation, saline increased by 5-fold in every sea or ocean on Earth. Desalination plants were able to cope with this load for approximately 20 hours. Then, fuel began to run low. And with the imminent collapse of civilization thanks to the multiple nuclear catastrophes, no more was delivered. Thus, the last ever drop of fresh water on Earth was pumped out no later than midnight yesterday. After the drought came the collapse. With no water available, civilization soon descended into anarchy. Governments, typical of authority to the very end, tried maintaining order. It didn't work. Soldiers rebelled, shooting rioters and runners alike. Those who didn't die were brutally executed moments after. They turned on each other soon enough, with only a few militaries intact from the carnage. The deserters fled, unwilling to stay and watch the extinction of Earth. But then came the worst, far worse than anything before it. There was, in fact, one source of water that hadn't been touched. I'm so lucky I realized before anyone else in my town. It was blood. Blood, which is over 90% water, was the only remaining liquid fit to drink. And so some did. At first, I didn't believe it. It was too horrific. Animals went first. The desperate drank the blood of cats, dogs, pets, and feral animals of all kinds. Many offered too little blood to be of any value. The situation was made worse by the fact that I live in a rather large metropolitan city, and beyond domesticated pets and the odd feral animal, there were no animals to catch and drink from. Perhaps those in the country fared better. I have no way of finding out, and frankly, I don't really care. I knew then that humans were the only other option. I first saw it 12 hours ago. An elderly man, dressed in nothing but a torn dressing gown, slowly made his way down the street that ran in front of my house. He called for help desperately, croaking out that his entire nursing home was dead or dying, that the nurses had fled, and that he was looking for help. He was so pitiful that I almost opened my door, if only to offer him some respite from the midday sun and some of my sparse rations. If I had been a second faster, I would not be writing this. Before I could open the door, 3 people, 2 men and a woman, pounced from the shadow of a nearby tree. The poor old bastard had no chance. They leaped upon him, frenzied in their dehydration, and set on him with makeshift tools. It was the most terrifying spectacle of my entire life. One of the men had a hammer. He set about bashing the man's joints in, one by one. Crack, crack, crack. I retched bile each time the hammer slammed into bone, so sickening was the crunch. The other had a gardening hoe. He hovered above the elderly man, bringing the makeshift weapon down once, twice. The tool cut through the man's ankles like a knife through a steak. The image made me vomit. After I did, I looked back, if only to satisfy my own growing horror. Oh, how I wish I hadn't. The woman, who was weaponless save for her own 2 hands, had straddled the man's chest. Her hands were spread on the screaming man's face as her own companions butchered him. Then, even as I watched, she dug her thumbs into his eyes. He howled like nothing I had ever heard before. She dug harder, pushing inwards and outwards simultaneously. When they were pulled free, blood, and even some less discernible liquid, splattered all over her. She grabbed them and ate them like fruit. I could hear the chewing sounds from my door. They bent to consume the precious blood, and I turned away. I call them the drinkers. There's one thing I want to make very clear about them. They aren't zombies, nor are they affected by some external force that forces them to drink the blood of humans, such as a virus or a disease. They are entirely human. I suspect that dehydration affects them worse than it does others, and this forces them to drink from humans in a form of pseudo-cannibalism, or perish. They represent the dark side of humanity. The drinkers also seem to recognize each other through some subtle signal. Not being a drinker, I wouldn't know it. As fast as I possibly could, I took my meager supplies, some small comforts, this journal, and my 357 Desert Eagle up into my bedroom. I pushed the bed against the door with my rapidly fading strength and piled furniture on it. The Desert Eagle has a full clip of 7, and I have 1 spare. Enough for 13 drinkers, and, well, I'm sure you can imagine. Another 6 hours have passed. I can really feel the dehydration now. My tongue feels numb, and my skin feels like sandpaper. I tried to eat some bread before, and I almost choked with no saliva to moisten my throat. Now I'm hungry, as well as thirsty. I don't even know why I've kept writing this. Maybe it's something to occupy me during the final hours of mankind. Maybe I hold some hope that a solution will be found, and somebody in the future will read this and remember what it was like. Maybe I'm just delusional. It's getting worse. I'm breathing heavily and becoming more and more lethargic. This room feels like a sauna. I can almost see the heat waves bouncing across the room, becoming more and more intense until I am literally cooked alive. It's not a pleasant vision. My pen keeps slipping from the page as I suffer random bursts of weakness. I'm scared I won't even be able to pull the trigger if the time comes. I'm so terribly thirsty. The last time I urinated, it burned. I haven't defecated for a long time now. My vision's fading in and out, and my head feels like it's going to split open from the intense pressure inside. My skin is so dry and leathery. I know I'm dying, but I've still got the Desert Eagle. Maybe I should kill myself before I lose the strength to do so. God knows it's better than dehydrating to death, or letting the drinkers get me. So thirsty. It's dark and I've lost the gun. Vision almost gone. So thirsty. I'm going mad. I'm dying. Wait, what's that? So thirsty. Somebody's knocking at the door. They want to be let in. They say the drinkers are coming. Should I? I don't know. Maybe I'll go get a drink. I'm so thirsty. Gateway of the Mind. In 1983, a team of deeply pious scientists conducted a radical experiment in an undisclosed facility. The scientists had theorized that a human, without access to any senses or ways to perceive stimuli, would be able to perceive the presence of God. They believed that the five senses clouded our awareness of eternity, and without them, a human could actually establish contact with God by thought. An elderly man who claimed to have nothing left to live for was the only test subject to volunteer. To purge him of all of his senses, the scientists performed a complex operation in which every sensory nerve connection to the brain was surgically severed. Although the test subject retained full muscular function, he could not see, hear, taste, smell, or feel. With no possible way to communicate with or even sense the outside world, he was alone with his thoughts. Scientists monitored him as he spoke aloud about his state of mind in jumbled, slurred sentences that he couldn't even hear. After 4 days, the man claimed to be hearing hushed, unintelligible voices in his head. Assuming it was the onset of psychosis, the scientists paid little attention to the man's concerns. 2 days later, the man cried that he could hear his dead wife speaking with him, and even more, he could communicate back. The scientists were intrigued, but were not convinced, until the subject started naming dead relatives of the scientists. He repeated personal information to the scientists that only their dead spouses and parents would have known. At this point, a sizable portion of scientists left the study. After a week of conversing with the deceased through his thoughts, the subject became distressed, saying the voices were overwhelming. In every waking moment, his consciousness was bombarded by hundreds of voices that refused to leave him alone. He frequently threw himself against the wall, trying to elicit a pain response. He begged the scientists for sedatives so that he could escape the voices by sleeping. This tactic worked for 3 days, until he started having severe night terrors. The subject repeatedly said that he could hear and see the deceased in his dreams. Only a day later, the subject began to scream and claw at his non-functional eyes, hoping to sense something in the physical world. The hysterical subject now said the voices of the dead were deafening and hostile, speaking of hell and the end of the world. At one point, he yelled, "No heaven, no forgiveness," for 5 hours straight. He continually begged to be killed, but the scientists were convinced that he was close to establishing contact with God. After another day, the subject could no longer form coherent sentences. Seemingly mad, he started to bite off chunks of flesh from his arm. The scientists rushed into the test chamber and restrained him to a table so he could not kill himself. After a few hours of being tied down, the subject halted his struggling and screaming. He stared blankly at the ceiling as teardrops silently streaked across his face. For 2 weeks, the subject had to be manually rehydrated due to the constant crying. Eventually, he turned his head and, despite his blindness, made focused eye contact with a scientist for the first time in the study. He whispered, "I have spoken with God, and he has abandoned us." And his vital signs stopped. There was no apparent cause of death. Call me tomorrow, okay? Still no messages on my phone. I guess he wasn't going to call back after all. I can't really blame him. Maybe I came on a bit too fast yesterday. I had noticed him long before he noticed me. His shiny black hair and unnatural blue eyes. I wasn't the only one watching him, that's for sure. His movements were elegant in a boyish way. And his smile. I would die for that smile. Still no messages. I thought about calling him. Maybe apologize for going too fast yesterday. I'm a coward, I know, but I just couldn't bring myself to dial his number. Besides, he'd promised he'd contact me when he's ready. So I'll wait. I'm patient. I know. I'll just casually stroll past his house, just to see if he's home. Maybe he's out. That would explain why he couldn't call me yet. He only lives half an hour away anyway. Maybe he's shy and is scared to call me. Silly boy. I'll go to him and tell him that he doesn't have to be scared, that I don't mind if he needs time. He lives pretty secluded on a farm on the outskirts of town. I can hear the sheep in the stables as I approach. My heart skips when I see there's lights burning inside. He must be there. He told me yesterday his parents would be gone for the weekend. They left him to look after the sheep for those days. Poor baby, that must be hard work. He was probably just too busy to call me. I'll have to stay here until his parents come back and help him take care of all those sheep. I knock on the door, but he doesn't answer. Maybe he fell asleep. The thought of his beautiful face, even more softened by sleep, makes me smile. I try the door. It's unlocked. There's hardly any crime around here, so I guess locking the door is not needed. I try to be as quiet as possible as I sneak through the house. I want to surprise him. I cringe at every creak the stairs make as I climb them. Finally, I've reached the bedroom, and I carefully open the door. There he is, lying in bed as I thought. Quietly, I switch on the nightlight on his desk so I can see his face. His blue eyes are open, staring into space, and his whole face is one bloody mess. His cheeks have been carved, the skin mostly removed and hanging loose on the sides of his face. He's missing his fingernails. They're laid out on the bed, carefully arranged. On his bare chest, words are carved. I look at him, my hands covering my mouth. He's still the same as I left him yesterday. He must have been so tired that he slept all day. How cute. I softly kiss his forehead, making sure I don't wake him. Then I write another message below the one on his chest, letting him know I'm here when he needs me. I leave the room, heading back outside. I think it's time for the sheep to go to sleep. And tomorrow, I'll introduce myself to his parents. I'm sure they'll love me too.